Hi, my name is Kennedy Chastain, and I'm a freshman chemistry major, Spanish minor at Howard University, and I'm on track to becoming an MD PhD student. And because of my love for science, but also my role as a black woman, a lot of people have come to me with their questions and concerns surrounding the coronavirus and the coronavirus vaccines. And because I love asking the unknown, I've sought to understand the questions and the concerns that people bring me. Today, I'm meeting with Dr. Geoffrey. Dr. Geoffrey Varner is a multiple best-selling author, international speaker, and Harvard-educated Master of Public Health Administration. He is also a member of National Speakers Association, the American College of Emergency Medicine Physicians, and the International Chief of Police Associations. Finally, Dr. Geoffrey has trained and educated thousands of students, residents, leaders, executives, first responders, and parents on split-second decisions when interacting with the police. So, let's get started.
Hold on. What's going on?
Hi,
How
Dr.
are you?
John.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Okay, Dr. Geoffrey. I guess my first question is, how did they roll out the COVID vaccine so quickly?
That is a great question. Well, first of all, Miss Kennedy, I'd like to thank you for having me on your program today. And that's a very good question. But if memory serves me, you are on track to go to medical school. So every so often I may call you student Dr. Chastain. It just makes me feel better. Now, as it relates to your question, how were they able to develop this so fast? And that's been the most common question that I've gotten. Well, first, let's just set it up. It usually takes about 54 months to develop a vaccine, anywhere from 54 to 72 months. We did this one in about 10 months. And here's why. Usually, when you develop a vaccine, it goes through four different phases, four different steps. It's the preclinical trials, the clinical trials, the manufacturing, and the distribution. It goes in just step by step. You don't skip steps. Are you following me?
Right.
Okay. Most of the time is spent in the manufacturing and the distribution phases. But because of all the money that was put into this vaccine across the world, all these stages were done at the same time. Follow me. So usually there's a preclinical stage. That part was easy. Then there's the clinical stage, and that part takes time. Here's why. You first have to get a number of people enrolled, and then you've got to get more funding. Well, we already had funding, but because there was so much COVID in the world, and so many of our fellow citizens raised their hand and volunteered, we didn't have any problem getting people enrolled in those clinical trials. And then the manufacturing and the distribution phase, it was taking place at the same time. So in other words, that 54 months, it was cut short down to 10 months, not because we skipped steps, but because a lot of the bureaucracy was taken out of the picture. So that's why it was done so quickly.
So, when you boil it down to how quickly or how the vaccines were rolled out so quickly, it all comes back to funding and the amount of people willing um to be tested or to be so so the people who volunteered, they were the ones who were testing the vaccine.
So the people who volunteer, whenever there's a clinical trial, people have to volunteer. And usually you get people, there's a difficulty getting people to volunteer. And then once they volunteer and you go through the different phases of the clinical trial, you have to get funding at each stage. But because so many people volunteer, that was not an issue because there was so much money involved, you didn't have to go back for increased funding. Now, which was going to bring you to your next point. So the third reason why is the bureaucracy was taken out of the picture. In other words, when I go through the clinical phase one, I've got to send that information over to the FDA. It takes them anywhere from 9 to 18 months to get back to me. Then you have to do that for each stage. But because the FDA, they were looking over our shoulders as we were doing these studies, we didn't have to send it. They were right there looking at it. In fact, I would put this forth. This has probably been the most studied vaccine ever in human history. And when I say studied, I mean the number of eyes and scientists looking at it.
Okay. And now when you say that there were a certain number of volunteers, when you're testing vaccines, do volunteers need to both have and not have the virus? Like, how does that work?
Great question. In other words, when you volunteer, you don't have the virus. We test you prior to make sure that you don't have the virus. And then you are enrolled in the study. And the study is real simple. There's a control arm and there's a study arm. So the study arm, they get the vaccine that we're trying to see if it's safe. And the control arm, they get just regular water. You don't know which part you are in. And then you're allowed to go out and just live your life. No one is injected with COVID. No one is injected with that COVID. You have to go out and naturally acquire COVID. But because there is so much COVID out there, enough people were able to go out and be exposed to it. And hence that helped us move through the clinical trials swiftly as well.
Okay, that makes sense. So another concern that was brought to me was about the long-term effects and whether or not we understand them as of yet for the COVID virus or the COVID vaccines. And if you can still get COVID, what is the point of taking the vaccine?
That's a great question. If you don't mind me, let me just back into this question.
Okay.
As it relates to long-term side effects, we don't know the long-term side effects of any of these vaccines. Why? Because long-term, let's define that about 5 years. We don't know what those effects are going to be 5 years. But based upon vaccines in the past, what we do know is that most side effects occur in the first 8 weeks. Based upon all the vaccines passed, most of the side effects occur in the first 8 weeks. Don't forget, we started putting shots in arms. We started to experiment on this vaccine over a year ago, last March. So we've had plenty of time and several months to see the side effects. Now, people often ask that very question, Dr. Chastain, and that is, we don't know the long-term side effects. But what we do know is that if you get COVID today and right now, you or your family could be dead in 2 to 3 weeks. We know the long-term side effects of contracting COVID. We also know that while young people your age usually don't die, but there's something called long haul COVID. And that's simply based, you get COVID, you clear your body of active COVID, but yet you still have symptoms. And what we're finding is that many young people are having long haul COVID. And that could be shortness of breath, loss of hair, erectile dysfunction, brain fog. There's a lot of things that can happen just as it relates to you contracting COVID.
Okay. So, though we don't know the long-term effects, we are seeing certain effects become prevalent in people who have contracted COVID.
Explain further. I'm not sure if I understand your question.
So we don't know the long-term effects of the vaccine, but we do know of some of the more, or so not long. So we don't know the long-term effects of the vaccine, but we do know that contracting the COVID virus, we do know of some of those effects. So would you say that it is better to go with something that so are you saying that it's better to go with an unknown than the known?
Ooh, I love how you phrase that. And I would just push back on the unknown, because we know that most of the symptoms occur as relates to side effects in the first 8 weeks. We know that. It's never been the study. It's never been the practice that we know the long-term 5-year side effects of most medications or vaccines. So it's very important for us not to introduce something new. But I do want to go back. I do want to pivot back to what was part of your first question that I did not answer. You said, why get the vaccine if you can contract COVID still?
Right.
Well, there are a few different reasons. Once you're vaccinated, you're 86% likely not to contract COVID. 86% likely not to contract COVID at all. And even if you do contract COVID, you're less likely to be hospitalized and greatly less likely to die. In fact, of the over 100 million people who have been vaccinated, there have only been 62 deaths. Pause. I didn't say that the vaccine caused the death. I'm saying that they were vaccinated, but yet they still contracted COVID and they died. So 63 people out of 100 million are wonderful odds, whereas you have a 1 in 200 likelihood of contracting COVID and dying and not being vaccinated. Did that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay.
So receiving the vaccine makes you significantly less likely to die than if you were to not receive it.
Right.
Okay.
And not only that, if you contract COVID and you are vaccinated, it's very likely your symptoms are going to be much less, greatly less.
Speaking of symptoms, can you explain why in the second dose, a lot of people experience a lot more like pain or side effects than they did in the first dose?
I sure can. So look at it this way. So when you are injected, it's a foreign body that's entering your arm. So it's a foreign body. Your body says, hey, look at that foreign body. Let's go get some troops because we got to fight that foreign body. So it runs, it causes some mild inflammation, not much, but it goes and it has to make troops. It takes about 2 weeks to make troops. It's got to go make those troops, about 2 weeks. Hence, pause, which is why once you're vaccinated with the first one, you have no immunity at all. None. No antibodies for the first 2 weeks. Why? Because your body's developing those troops, and those troops are antibodies. Okay, cool. The troops are made. They're ready. Now you get that second shot. Oops, a foreigner again. But those troops are already ready. Right. So they go right and they start fighting. And it creates this inflammation, which is what we want. And that inflammation causes swelling and soreness. So that's why it's more likely to happen in the second shot.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Geoffrey.
So not a problem.
Back to the vaccines. I've heard a lot of fears coming from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And a lot of people are still wondering, is it safe to take despite its recall?
The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is absolutely safe. So let me just break down just a few numbers. And there's some politics going on here, but we will stay out of it. Johnson & Johnson, what they found was that 7 people out of 7 million people developed central venous thrombosis. That's basically a clot within the sinuses in your brain. 7 in 7 million people. And so they decided, hey, let's halt this because we need to see what's going on. But the main reason why they halted it is because of this central venous thrombosis, you don't treat it in typical medical ways. Now, follow me on this one. People think that there's this listserv that all doctors across the country are on. We're not. There's no major listserv. That was one way of getting out the message to all the doctors. Say, hey, if you get this, we treat it differently than what we normally treat it. So that was the main reason. And so if you notice, the second reason was they just had to let the public know, hey, this is what's going on, which is why it wasn't recalled. They just stopped it for a short period of time. And now it's completely safe. If you have any doubts, keep in mind, I pause that for a second.
So whether or not it's kind of like based in conspiracy, there's a lot of ideas that there may be other things inside of that vaccine, like 5G or like government trackers. What do you have to say about that and kind of like the validity behind it?
So let me, I do appreciate you asking that, and that's been asked a lot. Let's just put it in. There's no the 5G just from a scientific point of view does not make sense. Right. So it's not much that I can comment on. But as it relates to other particles that are in this. I get why people are talking about the nanobites and nanotips. I get that. But let me just say this. If the government wanted to track you, they don't need to wait for a vaccine. Look at your cell phone. They can track you using your cell phone. They didn't need to wait for a COVID vaccine to track you. They could have put in a flu shot. They could put it in your medication. We don't have that technology yet, but it doesn't make sense to wait for the COVID vaccine. So that's not true. However, in fairness to my fellow Americans and my fellow citizens, I see where we got that from. Here's why. Because the COVID vaccine, we use nanoparticles, not nanobites. When people start saying nanobites, they're thinking, oh, you are tracking me. No, they use nanoparticles. Nanoparticles are simply very small particles. They've been around since 1954. So in order to get the vaccine in you, they've got to put in these nanoparticles, and that's how it gets in you. Somehow someone changed nanoparticles to nanobites, and everyone thinks that they're trying to track you. If they're really concerned about it, tell them they shouldn't have a cell phone at all.
If the government wanted to track you, they'd find a way.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, Kennedy, what I find interesting is that people say that, but do you have an Apple phone?
Yeah.
Do you recall that you woke up one morning and all of a sudden you had this COVID app on your phone that you did not put in there? You didn't ask for it. They put it on all Apple phones.
There's a COVID app on my phone?
There's a COVID app. If you Google, you can go in there and find it, because I went in and I found it on all of our phones.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's off, but you give them the option of turning it on. So in summary, if they wanted to track you, I don't think it's going to be the vaccine. It's some other stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So another concern is that with coronavirus constantly mutating and creating new variations, is it possible that there is going to be a third required dose to kind of combat these new mutations?
That's an excellent question. And yes, most of the vaccine will likely require an additional dose. If it's the Moderna and the Pfizer, which are double doses, which are 2 doses, it will require an additional dose. If it's the Johnson & Johnson, which is 1 dose, it will likely require an additional dose as well.
Okay. So in relation to the new CDC updates, do you believe that perhaps we're kind of jumping the gun with relaxing our mask usage if coronavirus is still mutating and if there's still a possibility that we may need follow-up doses?
Let me see how I can be tactful about this. I absolutely think that they called that wrong.
Okay.
For a number of different reasons. While they quoted some wonderful articles, I give them that. But from the least of the point of view, it didn't make sense. Here's why. If according to the latest data that I read, if 64% of those who are vaccinated are white, and we're happy for them, great job, we're happy for them, but yet only 7% of those vaccinated are Black, and only 6% of those are Hispanic. But yet you take off this mask requirement, knowing that the vast majority of people of color are not vaccinated. It did not take care of the least of us. So from a we're all in this together point of view, it was troublesome and bothersome. And I would even ask, if that data was opposite and only 5% of whites were vaccinated, we don't wish that on anyone, would they have made that call? So it's concerning. And given that the CDC already had this doubt around it anyways, it has created doubt for me and most of my colleagues as well.
Thank you for keeping real with that, because I know that as a medical professional, but also as a Black man,
Wait a minute. Who said I was Black? Who said I was Black? I'm just playing. Go ahead. Go ahead, I'm listening.
As a person of color, And as a medical
No,
professional,
black man's right. Go ahead. I am
okay,
definitely a black man.
okay, as a black man and
Mhm.
as a medical professional, um, I can see where it can kind of be, um, how do you do this tactfully?
Don't be tactful. Speak it.
I don't know. Well, as a Black woman and as, a rising scientist, I understand the concerns of people who look like me, but I also understand the science. But I also understand that there are still some prejudices in the system that, you know, deserve some of that distrust. And it can be kind of difficult to kind of walk that line.
You said a lot in there, and that was some very good stuff. Let me just pull some of it out. So I'm a black man in sciences. I mean, in the sciences and in medicine. Um, but I'm still a father, a son, a fellow American, and a regular human. And the facts are the facts.
Mhm.
Our own data, our own studies show that blacks are treated differently within medicine. And people want to go back to the Tuskegee experiment as the reason. And I get that. That makes sense. It's tangible. It's touchable. No. But that's not what it is. It's how we are treated this very day. If we walk into somebody's office, ER, hospital, we are treated differently. That's not Dr. Geoffrey just saying it. That's what the studies are showing. We are asked to wait longer. We don't get the same primary care doctor. We get less pain medicine. So there's a whole lot of reason for black folks to distrust the medical system. So it's easy for me to speak about it because right is right. And when you treat people poorly, then they don't trust you as much. So the medical establishment, they can do there's a lot they have to do to earn the trust of people of color, especially black folks, black Americans who grew up in this country. We are the ones who have felt the impact of that. So I understand why many blacks are hesitant, but I will say this: as a Hampton man, as an alpha, as a father, a son, a brother, former NAACP president, someone who's written books on black boys, I would encourage you to lean into those who you trust, who have been a proven part of the community. They're not new to this, a proven part of this. Lean into those who you trust and ask them what they are doing. Okay, I got it. Some of you are going to say, well, like Dr. Geoffrey, you have to do such and such because you're in the medical community. I'm a father. I would encourage you, if you want to get super specialized about or super focused, ask them what they're doing for their children. Look, I got my daughter vaccinated. I got my son vaccinated, who is 14. So not only am I just talking and studying and reading it, I'm living it. And I get it. There's some risk involved, but I choose to err on the side of science. I'm sorry, Dr. Chastain. I just ran on there, but I just had to get it out.
No, that was definitely welcome because that was pretty much my last question. I was wondering what you would have to say to people of color who have that rightful distrust in, government, the medical system, big pharma. And you had a lot of good points. I really like what you said about your children because I'm not a parent, but I feel like if as a father, it's easy to preach. Well, as a scientist, it's easy to preach, that we should get the vaccine. But as a father, for you to take your children and take that risk, it says a lot more about where your trust lies and what your priorities are. Um, and I feel like if if that can be said of you, then your trust in the vaccine is something that becomes more real and more apparent. um yeah.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily I don't. It's my trust in the vaccine. But it's also my concern about what I know COVID can do. Because don't
Mm.
forget, I'm not just a regular doctor. I am an ER doctor. I'm the one who's putting tubes down people's throats. I'm the one who was not letting family members come back, seeing their loved ones. So I experienced COVID differently. And while it's some people think, oh, well, it's not going to be that bad. It may very well not be that bad for you. But do you want to find out? Do you want to test it? Not me. I don't have that. I don't want to test it because COVID is a different beast, which has killed multiple millions of lives across the world.
Okay, that makes sense. Going back to my my knowns and unknowns, I believe that when we're talking about the vaccine, it becomes a question of known knowns and known unknowns.
Love that.
But when we go back to the virus, I feel like there's too many unknown unknowns to, still be hesitant and, unthorough with how we're handling it. And I believe that it kind of makes the push to take the vaccine all the more greater.
I think you bring up a very good point. Hold on a second. I love how you phrase that. And so I will add this. Either you're going to trust science or you're not going to trust science. And I have proof that you trust science. Here's the proof. Do you go for your regular checkups? Because if you do, that's science. Do you get your other vaccinations? If you do, that's science. If you get in a car crash, are you going to let them bring you to the ER? If you will, that's science as well. So we can't pick and choose when we're going to trust science. I err on the side of trusting science. But I want to say to those people who are doubtful, I understand your doubt. So what we're really talking about is overcoming your fear. If you've got some evidence-based literature that says why you should not take the vaccine, then follow that. But there's no evidence-based literature. You may have something somebody wrote, somebody sat in some closet, but you don't have any evidence-based literature. Why? Because they've not done those clinical trials on their own.
Okay, Dr. Geoffrey, I think that's a good place to stop.
All right. And if we need to do any part of this, that's not a problem. And when I bent my glasses last night. I saw the first part of my glasses were crooked. So if they look real bad, we'll have to do this again anyways.
Okay.
All right, ma'am. I will talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Geoffrey.
You're welcome.
You have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.